Okay, to open the case for the government side, I'll call upon the Prime Minister. Floor is yours. Here.
Starting my speech in three, two, one. Panels on how we see on how the democracy is work. There is a lot of society that is still doesn't understand and hate each other about the ideology that is they try to cater about the government. Right? I think this is something that is something that is not really progressive to begin with because a lot of society still think like this political how the way this politics is wrong and so far and so on. Therefore so proud we to propose. Here is our model, our models, right? Firstly, we are want to define like on how the progressive movement, how it's like look like the progressive movement, right? I think it is a movement that is try to create a society awareness about the progressivity, what is like more being a realistic, what is more open-minded towards the realistic condition that exists in the society, right? For example, like a feminism that is trying to aware the society on how the woman is actually really really powerful inside of the social living, and also there is how the LGBT they are actually exist. Then you are have to respect them for to begin with, right? And we think on how we are would likely to aggressively found, which means that we are creating as this progressive movement creating a lot of creating like a big donation to work for the think tank itself, and also we would like to create kind of monthly income to donate towards the think tank itself, right? Why then? How this would we think tank independent? I think it is like a research lembaga research. There is have power to we how the way we are overthrown itself. It is our goals is that on how we would like to offer how to creating this overthrown windows. I mean, like it is no matter on how the ideology that is exists, right? But we want a society that is more progressive, right? And also creating a structural reform that is more exists inside of the government that is going to be in the end of the day going to be more accountable, and also creating a better awareness of the societies, right? On also, we would like to see on how this whether or not why we should creating this expense towards this think tank and also grassroots the mobilization towards the society, grassroots mobilization, including the protest and the riots itself, right? So if of what this the opposition have to prove in this debate is that first why it is not necessary, and the second how the solution is actually is enough to adjust this the chaotic political condition, and the thirdly how in the end of the day the social awareness likely happen in their side is faster. Now moving on to my substantive, I have 3 points of substantive. Firstly, the urgency. Second, justification, and the third is the trade-off. Moving on to my urgency, right? Let's characterize progressive movement is actually look like, right? They are actively campaign for the actively campaign towards the government for their objective, right? There is a social change and also policy change. So that's why their movement is going to be more accepted inside of the society, right? And secondly, we would like to characterize the think tank itself, right? Firstly, I think it is advocating massively, right? And the second we think is they have the power to advocate to begin with. So that's why I think by massive aggressively fund this think tank, they would likely to have a better output of research, right? Why? Because they're going to be like high expertise to begin with. So that higher expertise, higher more facilities that is more better to support their research to be supports their research to begin support their research to begin with, right? And also, so that's why in the end of the day, what we're going to be advocate inside of the government is going to be more clear to address the issue that is actually exists inside of the society and so far and so on. And why then how this grassroots mobilization is more likely a mobilization for protest and riots itself like are still likely happen, right? Because we also not only like saying that we already research and so far and so on, right? We are also creating like a narrative inside of the society, like this is actually exists, right? What our research is actually real, right? Which means this grassroots is a society, a lot of society, right? We want to create change the grassroots itself. Or that is so. It is fundamental. How the fundamental of how the way thinking, right? So that's why I think by this kind of thing, it's going to be creating them to be more aware towards their political condition, right? And also creating massive narrative, right? Why this is important? Because we think in the end of the day, we're going to have we have to make them change, right? To be try to make we are really pursuing them to be more progressive, right? So because how the parameter is progressive is that no matter the ideology is going to be against you, you will still like accept it, respect it with like open-minded and so far and so on, right? I think in the end of the day, it's going to be creating a bargaining position stronger for a structural reform, for example, inside of the government, and also creating awareness inside of the societies, right? Because first, we have exact reason from the research itself why it's actually the problem is exists, and the second we have a bargaining position from the grassroots of the society itself, right? So I think in the end of the day, the government would likely create change inside of the society, right? And secondly, I would like to explain on how accountability is going to be strong in the end of the day, because we think therefore there's going to be a strong check and balance from the very first place, right? How in a lot of in the flawed democracy conference, right? How for them to create a change in the government, right? How to create a change in the government, right? For example, like in Indonesia, right? Even though mahasiswa is like massively rally towards the government still would not try to keep up change, right? In the end of the day, I think it's going to be harm participation, because in the end of the day, even like there are protests, it is just something that is wasting, right? So therefore, it's just like creating the society more distrust and so far and so on, and not likely change to begin with. Now moving on, not likely to change to begin with, and also a lot of social issue that is still happen, a lot of social issue that is still happen anyway. Now moving on to my trade-off, right? Opposition might sell a structural reform and also the society progressively. It is more likely happen when we are doing a cooperative, right? Because it is not brutal ways, because we are not massively protest, we are not riot and so far and so on, because going to be gain a respect, right? I think under what we see on the status quo there, when they are trying to be cooperative, it is nothing happen, right? The government will be still just doing in the same way. A lot of the society in the grassroots still think there is no like urgency for them. They still think that the politics is doesn't important for them, and so far and so on. That I think in the end of the day, there is no check and balance inside of democracy, right? That in the end of the democracy just as same as the authoritarian regime that we clearly oppose by the progressive movement itself, right? And lastly, right? Even if okay, we engage on how it's going to gain respect, right? Let's see on how the Black Lives Matter start. There's still a society try to disrespect this BLM, but at least in their country there is a low rate of the racism is happening slowly, right? So that's why we're so proud to propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for their speech. To open the case of the opposition side, I call upon the leader of opposition. Floor is yours. Here.
Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judge, notice on how the whole argument coming from the government side of the house is actually lacking of exclusivity. Simply what they're saying is basically like on how we need to apply social movement, on how we need to change the current Overton window in the current society and other things like that. Like they're saying that there are a lot of problems in our current status quo. There are a lot of inequality in our status quo. Yeah, we also believe that, right? We also believe that. We also believe that it needs to be solved too. It's also in line with the goals of the opposition. Like we also want to change the Overton window, right? But the government side of the house never explained to us why why the application of social movements, and why changing the Overton window doesn't actually but only can happen if we actually like extremely fund this explicit think tank to the very beginning, right? Simply because we as the opposite side of the house are going to give you a whole new characterization on how the current status quo is already progressive enough on how there are a lot of people starting to actually like accepting the social movements, on how in the current status quo, even conservatism here in Indonesia are slowly like depowered, that there are barely any case of social issues that make us need to do this suddenly to the very beginning, right? The whole government bench never actually explained that to us. So the government bench also do not give us an explanation on what kind of thing, what is actually the definition of think tank that explicitly want to change the Overton window. This think tank, because simply we believe that this think tank is actually the form of think tank that are actually doing research and share their research by sharing their research, but also like saying bad things to certain political view explicitly that currently like adopted by the Overton windows, right? And the opposition side of the house, we're going to talk to you guys on how we're actually extremely funding in this think tank will only give harm to the social movement. So what I'm going to talk about in this debate is I'm going to give you two major points. The first one would be why it's not in line for us, the social movement, to actually extremely fund this kind of think tanks. And second of all, I'm also going to talk about the harm if we actually extremely fund this think tank for the progressivity of the social movements, right? But before going there, I'm going to recharacterize to you what is actually the current status quo that's happening in Indonesia, right? As the opposite side of the house, we believe that yes, Indonesia actually adopting a lot of conservatism is popular among our society. That there are still a lot of problems, like for example, it's like the inequality, the Islamic supremacy, misogynistic, and etc. that needs to be solved, right? But the current status quo right now is very much progressive enough to the social movement, right? For example, it's like FPI is just get disbanded. For example, unlike a lot of SJWs are starting to get their spot to be invited in a lot of like interviews by university or even by medias like Magdalene, Vice ID, and etc. Or even RUU PKS just came back to the 2021 prolegnas, for example. Like it shows you that the social movement are currently starting to be accepted to the very begin with, right? According to the current status quo, there is no clear urgency that second the progressivity of the social movements that the government side has also never explained to us. So there is no actually clear explanations on why we should actually extremely fund this. Why should we why do we actually need this very much a movement where we do not actually have to urgency on why should we extremely fund this movement to very begin with, right? We're not saying that we currently don't have any opposition. What we're saying that there is a lot more people in gray area that's starting to lean more on the left, and how conservatism is starting to be counterbalanced by the current educational system that currently been adopted by the social movement. For example, it's like the social campaign on Women's March, the mass media like Magdalene and Vice ID, and there are a lot of social medias that are actually sharing the information regarding the social movements, right? Lawan patriarchy and etc. Right? So we believe that the current status quo is already progressive enough, and we already have the clear mechanism on how the society can actually be educated in terms of this, so that we can change the current Overton window to very begin with, right? Going to my first point of arguments on why it's not in line with the value of social movement to extremely fund the think tanks that explicitly support the shifting of the Overton windows. Judge, you need to acknowledge that the biggest value that fought by every single social movement is about inclusivity. Regardless of the social movements, they will always fight for inclusivity, right? That we cannot discriminate everyone, that we need to portray everyone as equal as possible, right? The moment that there are certain social movement that actually fund this explicit think tanks, it will make a narration in our society that social movement actually are actually like not inclusive to the very beginning, right? Because they are actually excluding people that believe in the conservatism to the very beginning, right? If the government side of the house saying that the conservatism is actually not a valid political view, they need to understand that conservatism is truly a legit political view that needs to be respected regardless of what their value is, right? Because even if it's dangerous to the very beginning with, there are people who actually believing in this value are the one who get like brainwashed by certain doctrine and some things like that also needs to be protected in this inclusivity that fought by every single social movements to the very beginners, right? So by actually excluding these brainwashed people, by actually excluding these conservatism people that very popular in the current society, it doesn't in line with the value of the social movement, which is to be inclusive to the very beginners, right? So therefore, what we believe that the current mechanism which we are educating these people through media, through campaign on women's march on social medias and other things like that will be more effective to actually like to change the Overton window, right? Because we can give them logical explanation slowly so that they can accept us to the very beginners without actually need to be not in line with our value to the very beginners, right? And why should we be in line with the value of social, with this value of inclusivity to the very beginners? Because we believe that social movement needs to reflect what they're fighting for, right? Imagine if you're meeting someone who say that we need to be inclusive while actually saying that there are certain things that cannot be included in this inclusivity at the very beginners, right? I'm not saying that we should tolerate the discrimination. What we're saying is that we need to change them slowly by showing to you guys how good inclusivity actually is. That's what currently happening in the current status quo. That's what's making the current status quo are progressing to the very beginners, right? So going to the second point of arguments on how the harm that will happen to the current progressivity of the social movement here in the Indonesia, for example, right? The moment that social movement are actually funding extremely to these think tanks, it will create a narration in our society that social movement is only a form of a group of extremist people who actually wants to change their political view because they feel like they're invalidated because they do not even actually want to hear them to the begin with, right? The moment that social movement are portrayed as extremists, there are a lot of people in gray area. There are a lot of people in gray area that barely leaning to the left or to the right now will be scared to actually engage with the value of social movements to begin with, right? Simply because, who wants to be in a group of people that like very much extremists that do not want to hear everyone, that invalid certain group of people especially a valid political view at the very beginning, right? The moment that this happened, a lot of supporters will be, social movements will lose a lot of supporters to the very beginning. But even worse, a lot of people in gray area that currently not leaning towards both left and right will also be scared to actually lean to the social movement that we are currently that the goal of both sides are actually wants to make the progress of the social movements, right? So the question would be, how can the social movement can actually be progressive if people do not want to follow it first, right? So therefore, if you want to change the Overton window, we believe that the most strategic way is to win the opposition side of the house. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition, for their speech. To continue the case of the government side, I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. Floor is yours. Here.
I would like to start my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mr. and Madam Speaker, the first speaker has explained to you what is the current status quo nowadays. Like that, many people, why there are many social movement that against the government policies, right? Because there are still a group of people that don't know what is actually the government want to try to say, what the government would like to try to make policy in order to make society to shifting the society prosperity and also for the nation, right? But let's hear that the first speaker of the opposition said that the current status quo is progressive enough because the society have already know about the government's policy, and they have obey the government's policy and so on and so forth. But notice that we cannot guarantee that the society understand enough about the government's policy is if the society will not try to make any riots or protest to the government policy, because the government cannot make sure that the society won't make any protest, and also will not against the government's policy, right? Because notice that this is why the social movement exists to be the bridge between the society and also the government. Because why? Because the social movement is intent to illiterate people about what is happening and what is the actually the government policy, right? Because notice that why when the first speaker of opposition team said that why social movement is in line with most people's value, because the people are not the government, because there are two things that I will explain about the government side and also um, the society side. Well, okay, let's talk about the why a social movement is in line with our value. The first one is because when let's talk about the grassroots of people, right? Okay, so because we have to notice that the policy which is created by the government itself is most likely to have to focus on the grassroots first, on the society first, right? Because we in here that the grassroots is the vulnerable actor that that feels that get the most big impact of policies that are being made by the elites of government, right? So this is why it's very important for the for the grassroots or the society to understand, and to understand why government have to try to make policy, right? And how why the government try to make certain policies, and what the government want to this nation and also for the society. But the problem is that the our concept nowadays that there is no there is a problem. There is a problem exists that there are many protests and riots is because that the the society the society doesn't really know about what the government would like to try to say to by making the policy, right? Okay, let's talk about the government first, right? The government is the policy makers, right? Which is that they have to focus on the society first. But and in here that the problem is that why the society like to do a protest, because the government is assumed uh, is because society think that the government is not count their voice. They count their voice and doesn't accept their voice and accept their speech, ladies and gentlemen. And also the government policies is not helping them to live in the nation. So this is why social movement exists, right? The social movement exists, right? Because social movement exists, and that's why that we have to focus on um, of shifting the social movement to fund this think tank because we have to know that think tank is not is is a part of the social movement that will that the that will explain that will do a research and to make and the research it will be shared and will be educated for the society, so they will know about what is the certain politics that happens right now, and the think tanks the research of the think tank itself, it will be shared for the government too, which is that the government will try to portray what is society like. So they have to make a policy based on the prioritization of society itself, teman-teman. So in here that I will explain what is the impacts of the stakeholder itself. Okay, so let's talk about society, right? Because why we have to focus on the why we have to focus on social movement itself. So why we have to propose this motion, because we have also know that society is still lack of awareness about a political system, about politic problems, and so far and so on. As we see that in Hong Kong demonstration, for example, or omnibus law in Indonesia that happened recently in Indonesia, because they don't know what the government tried to say, what is the government intention to make the policy, because they think that because there is a certain certain mindset that, oh, the politics is a government business, right? So we as the society don't really need don't really need about to enter the political system, or we because there is because society must think that, oh, the government won't hurt our voice, so they it create based on the example that's why we want to ban that, we want to diminish that about political apathy, political apathy in the society. Okay, comparing with this, when they say that, oh, we don't need this kind of thing because the society is already progressive, but as I my first speaker explained and my what my speech before, that they don't understand about politics, and they have and society nowadays is still apathy towards our politician. This is the thing that we want to diminish, right? So we from this from this from shifting the Overton window, it will the society will think that all politics is important and it will impact to our lives. So we have to participate in politics also, and the society will aware that, oh, our voice is matter in the government when the government is making a policy. So it will make up the society in the end of the day, increase their political literation. Okay, so moving to the government side. Okay, so the government is a policy maker, which is they have to aware of society voice, right? So by think tanks itself, the think tank itself, because think tank have when think tanks focus on the grassroots mobilization, the government will aware that, oh, society or the grassroots itself is the fundamental actor of their policy. So they will make a policy by prioritizing what is the current problem of the society. So the society, and also the government will give chance for the society to give a chance to society to give their voice, in fact, the society to participate in making
Order.
their policy. Okay, so that's why in the result of the house that what the in the end of the day, that there's no political problem and chaos, and also no apathy from the society, and also in the end of the day it will cheating the democracy itself. So that's why we are proud to propose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for your speech. To continue the case of the opposition, I call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Floor is yours. Here.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen. Wait. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, there are several things that I like to rebut from the point that the government side of the house has made. That the first thing is that the government's proposal is not really exclusive, because they can prove why the current mechanism doesn't can create awareness as to what my first speaker already explained to you, that the status quo is already enough when the social movement itself can already be accepted by the society. You can see when the RUU PKS that changed back into prolegnas 2021, it means that the government already aware just how much this social movement can affect the society, and how important the social movement is for the nation itself. And also the government side of the house forget have a good audience in the first place, meaning the social movement itself need to have audience or supporter who is aligned with their own value and support it fully, and not only those who attack in the first place and not aligned with the value of the inclusivity that the social movement brought in the first place. The rest of my rebuttals and response will be integrated inside my argument. So there are two main things that in my argument. The first is how this motion will harm the society itself, and the second one is the comparison of the two words between what the government bring and what the opposition will bring. So the first main argument is how this will harm the society. So if we apply this motion, ladies and gentlemen, it will create a world where society will instead being forced to accept the sudden shift that the progressive movement brought in which we believe will greatly harm the society. So in the first place, think tanks have big power because they are the one who tell the society the overall shift or change that happened within the country's policy, meaning that the society already trusts the information from think tank and the credibility itself for a long time. So in that case, what kind of harm that will happen in the society? So the harm that will happen is that the moment think tank act one-sidedly, it will cause a great disagreement within the society itself. So the government side of the house already said it themselves that think tank have power to advocate, have big power to advocate. So of course, whatever that their decision, their prediction, research, or explanation, it will greatly affect the society, and it will even change the society perspective on the political view of the nation itself. So in status quo, there is a certain balance or neutrality within the general society, in which each individuals have their own value uh, and view who varies from each other. So if we apply this motion, it will disrupt this balance and neutrality that currently already happening in the society. So people will then feel forced by what the social movement do, because the movement will go as far as aggressively funding this think tank to side with them. So when think tank side with only this particular side, their research and explanation won't be as objective as it was before. So it will be exactly one-sidedly, and it will of course create an imbalance. Society's perspective will greatly affected the moment think tank pick side because of the trust, the trust and the fact that think tank is what the research that the think tank do is believable, and they have credibility from a long time. So it will create an even unhealthy debates to happen in the society between those who are against and who are supporting. So this will also hamper the democracy within the society, because the society, the people, will deeply influenced by what the social movement brought by in aggressively funding the think tank, making it hard to cooperate of democratic value within the society, because people will be forced to side rather than choosing it by themselves. So what exactly does society need in the first place? In the first place, society need a socialization that is not radical, a movement that is not radical, that is not forcing them or hampering them on making their own choice, because they need a movement who still uphold democratic value, in which they can choose themselves if they want to, if they want to support or not. So aside from the society, this will also give a great disadvantage toward the think tank itself. So the think tank will then lose their own credibility, because their act won't be neutral anymore, because they will then pick a side in which will give the advantage toward the social movement, toward this particular social movement. So if the think tank agreed to do this, to pick one side that will greatly advantage the social movement, think tank will then lose that credibility, and of course it will bring this great disadvantage to them as a research institute that of course proud with their own credibility, with their own power to research and so on and so forth. So the second point of my argument is the comparison of the two words itself. So the government side of the house already brought to you their own proposals, in which they will still aggressively funding the think tank to then shift the Overton window. And we believe that the best case scenario that will happen in the government is the progressive movement will then have a big progress, even with the force, even with the whole riot that happens. And the worst scenario that they can get is all the backlash that happen, all the riots, and all the harm that my first speaker and me already say to you, because it won't only harm the social movement itself, it will harm, first it will harm the social movement, of course, and then it will harm the think tank, and it will harm the society. So it won't just it won't just a small harm that will happen if we apply this motion, because all the stakeholders that's involved in this motion will have disadvantage if then this motion will apply. So what about the scenarios in opposition side? So the best case that will happen in the opposition side is that by staying in the status quo, what we do still align with what social movement value, like what my first speaker already said, because social movement don't have social movement value is that no discrimination regardless of race violation, even in political view itself. So, and the worst case that can happen in our side is that progressive movement may won't have a significant progress, but it will of course minimize the backlash or harm that will happen if we apply this motion. So you can clearly see that even the worst case scenario that happened in our side is still better than the best case scenario that the government have, because even when the government already succeed with their own proposal, uh, in 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 what cause will they do that? Because even in our side, the riots or the riots or the harm won't happen, and it won't greatly harm the entire stakeholders that are involved in this debate. Because if we admit that maybe in our side progressive movement won't have a significant progress in their like what they are doing, but we still believe that it won't create a more worse situation than what the government side of the house has brought. So in this case, we're proud to oppose. Thank you.
I thank the DLO for their speech. To continue the case of the government side, I call upon the government whip. Floor is yours. Here, here.
Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, panels is in this motion. The opposition side didn't engage in our case that we want this society to more open-minded, to respect each other ideology. We respect all of this ideology, either it conservative, either it left, either it liberal. Uh, we respect that. We didn't. It, my first speaker said that we didn't. Every ideology is valid. We didn't state that conservative is not valid. So what we want to achieve that in this motion, that is all our society to be more respect each other by to more open to the ideology. I mean, not to change the ideology, but to respect each other opinion, to create the better uh, political society. By this motion, it's to we fund the think tank itself. The think tank itself, why we want to fund the think tank, because the think tank is a credible research institute that they have, as my first speaker said, they have power to hire an advocate to make make this progressive movement to the government. So this think tank also uh, can create the educated society. So uh, so as the opposition said that this think tank, if we aggressively fund the think tank, it will make the credibility of the think tank will lose, because the debate and the unhealthy debate from society. But here this that it's okay to make a debate or discussion in this society. Our goals is to make our society educated, to make the society to be open-minded to the other ideology, to uh, clear all the misleading information about the ideology. Like, for example, if the our society in Indonesia itself think that LGBT community is so liberal, so Western, so immoral, we want to change that ideology. We want to uh, educate our society to respect other opinion, uh, to make that uh, to make our our society to avoid the discrimination that that we know that in Indonesia itself the discrimination is overwhelming in LGBT community, in the minority religion, the minor religion, in the um, feminist itself. So that's why we thought to propose this motion. So let's talk about the opposition side, that they said that it's our status quo, it's progressive much. But here the fact that in our Indonesia itself, that maybe FPI banned that, like it's not a parameter to think that our society is that the FFE banned is not a parameter to think that our society is still open-minded enough. It's as we know that in our society, in our life, that has many discrimination towards the LGBTQ plus community, that no one, that our society itself, it's still judgmental to them. So there are more community to pursue than FAE itself, that more that has to um, admit itself. So let's say that opposition teams said that um, this our country has progressive much, like the RUU PKS is still not is out from the DPR discussed, because our society is not united enough to bring this case to the government itself, that our society didn't understand enough why this is urgent, why um, this case is urgent to bring out to the government itself. So here our goals is to make our society to understand enough about the progressive movement, that by the aggressive fund to the think tank to educate our people from the grassroots itself. But why it's grassroots, why we want to the grassroots itself, because this grassroots itself is the only effective way to educate our people, to educate our society, to make them respect each other opinion, that every opinion is matter, that every ideology is matter. So that's why we so proud to propose this motion. Thank you.
I thank the government whip for their speech. To continue the case of the opposition, I call upon the opposition whip. Floor is yours. Here, here.
3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, we agree that think tanks have big advocate impact. Yes, it's true, they can easily influence people with their, in quotation mark, logical reasonings, and also those information that could actually help people to understand, for example, more about progressive movements or anything about information regarding the policies that will be implemented in certain country or certain nations. But then imagine if this platform is being supported, is being influenced deeply by a certain progressive movement that wanted to memanfaatkan these think tanks for their promoting platform, for which eventually will also affect those postings, those news, those information that actually these think tanks provide to the neutral, to the grassroots people in a certain country. Notice that this certain information will not be actually the real, will not actually have great credibility, like how Taskia said, upon this will be hardly affected by a certain ideology or certain progressive idea or values that will be implemented. Also, Katami also told to you about how it is not going to work under this current status quo because it is already enough. Therefore, opposition will prove to you why it is actually prove to you in my class, in my speech, that actually government crises and proposals are not going to work at the end of the day. Okay, but before that, government has already failed to prove and actually provide the certain contextualizations that why it is, should be exclusively supporting think tanks, and why actually only think tanks could actually affect these people. I will also tell compare to you how this status quo is already enough. Also, government is not actually able to provide to show us and to provide a protection to the, for example, the actors that is going to be involved upon this certain political shift. Here, opposition will prove to you and why opposition is going to win this debate. So in my class, there will be the comparison and also the rebuttals incorporated together. So there will be two big points of the clash under this debate. First, upon the urgency that is real, which is why the reason this motion is going to be discussed or debated. First, government tell us upon how status quo is not enough. There are no enough awareness from people. Upon how this information is not working, and we should actually use this certain progressive movements should actually side it and actually have these think tanks to become the certain promoting agent for their value. We tell you status quo is already enough, and what government claims is wrong. First, people already know what is happening in this world in the era of globalization, where people are always having their phones in their pocket, in their hands, and they always constantly checking those social medias, those news, those any types of media, newspaper or TVs that always report what is actually happening. We think those platforms is already enough because they are being exposed every day and every time. Also, this media, this certain media will certainly have much more power because lots of people are able to access this platform to actually know more about, for example, progressive movement. They could Google it. They didn't need to have a certain think tanks that doctrine them about what is actually happened in the current status quo. Even if the government brought to us upon how they could create a big shift, they could actually have a better awareness, a healthy awareness, because the think tanks supports this progressive movement. I will tell you why this is not going to work. First, think tanks are not providing the only biggest impact. I told you there are a lot of social media platforms, Twitters, or any news, like for example, The Guardian, CNN. There are lots of platforms that are constantly posting each day. They are always actively helping every day. If you just think logically, if you ask people, do you know what is a think tank, rather than do you know what is CNN or The Guardian, people will probably think that understand this. They know CNN or The Guardian or other newspaper sites better than these think tanks. This already shows to you how it is. This platform is not going to effective, and therefore it is going to hamper the progress because these progressive movements are going to menghamburkan their money into a certain platform that's not going to help. The second of all, think tanks is also not going to have much more better exposure because at the very least, to begin with, they are not even that much known by the people, or for example, grassroots people that government championize. We think the proposal that government wanted to try to tell us about how this exclusivity is not there, therefore their ideas should not stand. Also, this effectiveness won't happen because the awareness that surface is not objective, because it will also being affected by a certain value that already being paid for these think tanks, and at the end it's not going to work because of the nuance of this information, which is full of bias, and it won't be better awareness or the healthy awareness that government want. Therefore, the exclusivity upon this supporting progressive movement won't be there because the proposal is not going to affect create a betterment and the other side. Also the second class, what will happen in the long run? First, Katami already they say that democracy will be there. There will be no violations. There will be blah, 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 something so utopic. But Katami already brought to you why this providing this progressive movement, which is going side to a certain part, is going to hamper the value of the progressive movement itself. It is going to hamper the think tanks. It is going to hamper the value of democracy. First, they also progressive movement values inclusivity, but when just like Katami brought to you, when they are not able to be inclusive to every people, there won't be a progressive movement at all, because the real reason is not there again. And also why it is going to hamper more the progressive movement. I already told you about the characterization of these certain think tanks. They are not there well known, even if they can help, but those information is not going to credible or objective enough, because it's going to be cited from what said this. Therefore, this is going to be so harmful for the progressive movement. Second of all, about the democracy part, government didn't engage to us upon what will actually happen to the credibility of these actors about these values. They tell us about how they will actually acquire open-minded people who understand the ideology, but then when there is a certain overwhelming power who is always pushing you to believe this certain political spectrum, who is always to push those grassroots people who is unable or who is on the gray area, these grassroots people who is less likely to understand, they will be doctrined to this credibility. Therefore, there will be actually an open-minded people at the end of the day, and the argument will actually won't stand. Also, in the long run, this democracy won't, the value of democracy will be hampered. First, speaker told us about the check and balance in democracy, but notice that under the work, there will be no certain platform that aggressively telling grassroots people and gray area people to side and support this progressive movement. And it will hamper the discussion and the voices of others, karena nggak ada, because there's no social movement platform that is actually to let them to speak for themselves. And therefore, this is not going to implement that much of effect towards these grassroots people, even if they wanted this progressive movement to work. At the very end of the day, this is the reasons why under these two classes is being won by the opposition side, and therefore you should vote for the opposition to win this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, the opposition whip, for their speech. To conclude the case of the opposition, I call upon the opposition reply speaker. Floor is yours. Here.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So basically, I'm going to explain to you guys why the opposition started house win this debate, right? So I'm going to split my reply into 3 parts. The first one would be what's missing from the government. Second, why the opposition, the points that still standing from the opposition, and last, why the opposition actually win in most clashes in this debate, and not most, actually all clash in this debate, right? So first, what's actually missing from the opposition? I think it's kind of clear on how what's missing from the government. I think it's kind of clear on how the government actually do not understand what the motion is about, right? Because simply, like the whole case that they're talking about, it is about on how they believe that social movement needs to be applied, on how they believe that the current Overton window needs to be shifted, and how like and other things like that. We believe that that's also what we want to do, right? We very much agree with what the government has already explained to us and from the first speaker, but they never explained to us why should we actually like aggressively fund this movement to begin with, right? Simply because we already explained to you guys on how why is the current status quo is already progressive enough. For example, it's like the RUU PKS that been put back in the Prolegnas 2021, FPI disbanded, and other things like that barely engaged by the government side of the house. So we believe that even like from the very basic of the argument, the motions, the government failed to actually give us an explanations, right? For example, it's like they're saying that they also want to respect the conservatism. We believe that that's not what this think tank that explicitly wants to change the Overton windows too, because we already characterized you guys. The think tank will like say that you cannot be conservative to very begin with, right? So yeah, we don't know what the governments actually want. So what's points that still standing from the opposition? Like we have a lot of points. For example, it's like the justification on how this movement cannot actually do this because it will not in line with the value, with the inclusivity value that's been fought by every social movement that been fought for. No engagement at all on how we need good audiences that follows this fellow to begin with, right? That first and second speaker has already extend to you guys. No engagement also. And on how, by actually doing this, will make a lot of social movement being portrayed by as an extremist group that makes a lot of people in gray area and actually afraid to actually engage to the social movement to begin with, not engaged to them, right? As the opposite side of the house, we already tackled down a lot of arguments coming from the government side of the house that I will explain in my class, right? So I believe that there are like several clashes in this debate. The first one will be which one can bring more progressivity to the social movement where beginners, right? So the government side of the house came into this debate saying that by actually doing that, they can make people to be more aware of social movement things, on social issue things, right? But they never explain to us why they can only do that if we actually like apply their case, right? Meanwhile, the opposite side of the house has already give you guys an explanation on how by actually applying their mechanism. Yes, it can make people more aware, but it can also give a lot of backlash to the social movement. For example, it's like being portrayed as an extremist group, on how it will make social movement lose their credibility because they're not inclusive. Where begin with, that's not even engaged by them. So we believe that in terms of bringing more progressivity, the government side of the house win on a lot of stuff. For example, it's like on how we already explained to you guys the current system of education, like we give them logical things through women's march, through social media campaign, and other things like that, has already like progressing the current status quo, making people more aware, like slowly shifting the Overton windows to begin with, right? And then in terms of justification, I think it's kind of clear, like the opposition have good justification on how social movements need to like uphold the value of inclusivity, but they never also engage to us. Meanwhile, the government do not actually have any clear justification because their main point only about their main strongest justification, I think, is about democracy that like very much nonsense in this debate because I already explained to you guys on how the social movement, regardless of this, they still have the platform for them to speak. There will always check and balance and things like that. So we believe that in terms of justification, the government also win. Yeah. So I think it's clear that the opposition win this debate. Thank you.
Thank you for the opposition reply for their speech. To conclude the case of the government, I call upon the government reply speaker. Floor is yours. Here.
Test. Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Chair, please listen to us, right? I think the opposition side of those are completely never hear our case, right? Completely dismiss our case that is we already brought to you from the very first place, right? I think we already proved to you on how our urgency is actually really matters, and also they are dismissed on how the characteristic of grassroots that exists in the very first place, right? Because we already talked to you on how this kind of people is actually less educated, and also they having less information, so therefore the information that they get is hard for them to clarify. So that's why we really need to this think tank to change them, right? Not necessarily we are changing them because they are conservative and so far and so on, but I think we at least for them, for open-minded, they are more open towards what is actually issue that exists in society, right? And moving on to my classes, 2 points of classes, right? Firstly, the urgency. Secondly, the justification, and ultimately the benefit, right? In the urgency, opposition only run around on the society already progressive enough and so far and so on, right? But I don't think it is actually matter, right? Because they think like on how the FPI already banned, RUU PKS already says in the DPR and so far and so on. I think this is not really significant enough because I think the grassroots society still being bigot anyway, right, ladies and gentlemen? Because they don't really understand, they less educated. What does the actually issue, and also what research for them to campaign from this progressive movement to begin with, right? Comparatively, in our side of the house, right, we already since we are giving this think tank really big massive funding, so in the end of the day we are could just hire expertise to begin with to improve the output of the research. So that's why the advocacy of the think tank itself is going to be better to address the key issue that actually exists in society. This is completely dismissed by the opposition, right? And in the end of the day, in our side of those, is going to be creating a structural reforms, right? Not just because necessarily the government structural reforms, right? Not necessarily just because the government the government is okay. There is a policy change to be more progressive and so far and so on. But we also creating the society awareness, right? Because we massively try to give the society to be more progressive from the very first place, right? So therefore, you have to give a credit towards the government, right? Because we already proved to you on how the significance itself, and also how the structural reforms there is exist, and grassroots itself is already dismissed completely by the opposition. And the second, opposition are also never engaged in our justification, right? They never prove to you on how the check and balance, strong check and balance is actually happening in their side of the house, right? Because we already proved to you on how the flawed democracy countries, it's actually the harm participation that is exists from the very first place, right? So I think the justification is supposed to be goes to our side, right? Because we already proved to you on how, since it is how it's not going to be likely happen when the government only hear when the government is not actually have a strong bargaining position to begin with, right? Is this also kind of thing that dismissed by the opposition in the end, in the end of the day, right? Now moving on to my to the benefit class, right? In our set of the society is could be aware, right, on how the literate, because we already proved to them on how strong bargaining position that is exist by the research, and also to educate them, start from the grassroots, and grassroots takes at the end of the day creating the structural reforms, right? So in the end of the day, the society will be feel that they are really matter inside of the government, right? And this case is actually completely stances from the very first place, right? So in the end of the day, what does the opposition say, that the credibility will be lost and so on and so on, is not going to be happen in the end of the days, right? So that's why we're so proud to say that government win this debate, because our case are never being engaged by the opposition. Thank you.
Thank you for the debate, and I'm going to start my oral adjudication. I will, um, okay, I will divide my oral adjudication into three parts: general comments, decision, and also the clashes. Firstly, on the general comments, I think there is a lacking of characterization under both sides of the house on the key differences between a think tank and the grassroots movement, right? Because the motion clearly stated that to aggressively fund think tanks at the expense of grassroots. Therefore, these two needs to be differentiated. For example, there needs to be an analysis on what is the key differences in think tanks output, for example, compared to the grassroots output, for example. Uh, um, and therefore, with this characterization, with this differentiation, I think it will be easier for you guys to decide the harm and benefit of think tank itself. Therefore, with that kind of characterization, the government can trade off the grassroots movement, for example, for the think tank, and the opposition can trade off the policy researches, for example. And I think that can only happen the moment you characterize well the think tank output. But finally, the decision, I give the winning to the sorry to the opposition side of the house on this one clash. I think both side of the house trying to claim on whether their side of the house are able to gain more people, right? Because I think the government side of the house wants to create more awareness in people. Therefore, the grassroots movement can be bigger, for example, and how the think tank will give more understanding to the people on progressivity policies, etc. And on the other hand, the opposition side of the house also wants more people to understand the social movement progressivity, etc. The affirmative enter the debate wants to claim this clash by saying that this think tank will socialize and advocate and give objective reasons to the policies, etc. And the opposition tries to claim this clash by saying that, oh, the status quo is progressive enough and the current mechanism exists. Okay, on the idea of whether the status quo is progressive enough, I think it is deadlock, right? On one hand, on the government side, they say that, oh, it is not progressive enough, and on the opposition side, government side not progressive, and the opposition side progressive enough, and they give a defensive reasoning to it. I don't think there's a tiebreaker to it, but I think that tiebreaker, what makes opposition wins this clash is the idea that um, the the opposition told us that social media and grassroots advocacy that is already happening in status quo with the existence of Vice, Magdalene, Twitter, etc., is bigger and is more massive, right? That actually no one knows what think tank actually is, and therefore it will be inefficient for us to fund in a platform that no one even knows. Um, and and also, I think the opposition also gives an analysis on if think tank have a leaning. If we fund think tank, they will have a political leaning, right? Therefore, the objective nature of the researches will be compromised, and it will make people less believe in the think tank itself. What does it tell you? It tells you that the alternative already exists and it is more effective, but also the opposition has already successfully mitigated the benefit of the of funding a think tank itself. And I think an affirmative tries to respond to this by saying that, oh, in status quo, people don't know. The status quo mechanism is not enough, therefore we need think tank, right? But I think there is a lack of step-by-step analysis on why think tank will be more likely to be listened, for example. Therefore, I don't think the affirmative response can apprehend the opposition analysis on the status quo mechanism and how the affirmative will actually backlash the movement and backlash the think tank itself. Also, the opposition has already brought the idea on the how are they going to portray themselves as more inclusive, because the moment you say that one other ideology is objectively false, you will become an extremist, and it backlashes the attempt to get the gray area, for example. And yeah, therefore on the idea of awareness, I give the winning to the opposition side. But on the idea of the principle, right, the affirmative tries to claim the debate by saying that principally we want more people to be more educated and open-minded. And on the opposition side of the house, they say that saying that something is objectively wrong will create an unhealthy discourse and bad for the democracy, for example. But I think these two analysis is contingent on the practical analysis. For example, the affirmative claims is contingent on their efficacy to change people, and the opposition analysis is contingent on the idea of inclusivity, extremist, and gray area sorry, analysis. And I think for these reasons, I think opposition win, because they manages to not only neutralizes the benefit coming from the government, but also provided the analysis why current mechanism exists and goes very well, and also gives an analysis on why if we fund the think tank, it will actually backlashes the credibility of think tank itself. Therefore, the benefit of the government cannot run. I think for those reasons, I give the winning to the opposition side of the house.